Welcome to the VOD TV. We're here with Bern Grush, and one of the things that came out of 2020 was the extension of retail to the home. And of course, it's more than just package delivery. We're seeing people have meals delivered and groceries and all kinds of things. And right now, humans are in vans and cars are delivering those things. But in some places, a few places, we actually have some robots delivering some of those things. And the question, is this going to be a trend that's going to lead to this mix of humans and machines sharing sidewalks, curbs, and streets? Or is it going to mean machines having the same rights as a pedestrian or as bicyclists? Where does the demarcation between the street and the sidewalk start and end? Well, that's why Bern is here. I'm going to call you Mr. Curb, Bern, but you're going to help us answer these questions and many more. And maybe you won't be able to provide answers, but at least provide direction on where things are going as these new autonomous delivery technologies, whether they're a 100-pound delivery robot or a 2,000-pound autonomous vehicle, start to take hold. So, Bern, Harmonize Mobility, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the ISO standards to kind of create this interface between the sidewalk and curb? And while you're doing that, I'm going to pull up an illustration of one of the challenges.
Ken, thanks so much for this opportunity to talk about this work. Obviously, I think it's wildly important, and I think it's under-recognized amongst all of those of us who are interested in automated vehicles and autonomous vehicles and so on. And that is because these small robotic vehicles have very, very many fewer boundaries. They're less expensive to put together. They're smaller. They have almost no regulatory boundaries by comparison. It's not that they don't have any, but they just have so many fewer than autonomous vehicles, robotaxis. So what I think is going to happen, and it's already happened, for example, one of the companies that is in commercial operation, it's called Starship, has passed their 1 millionth delivery in January of this year, and I believe they are paid for their deliveries now. In other words, it's a commercial operation. It's not an experiment. That's important because so far, all of the autonomous taxis and all the autonomous trucks and so on are experiments. So these, although there are many companies experimenting with the robots, that particular company is in commercial service, and several others are in commercial service. KiwiBot, for example, it's another one. Companies like FedEx and DHL are developing these devices as well. I don't know that they're in commercial service, but the point is, many people are developing them. They are more. It's easier to develop and deploy them than it is robotaxis and trucks and so on. They are perceived as safer. I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying they're perceived that way, and because they're already in commercial service in some places, there's a commercial viability to them that has not yet been proven for robotaxis and autonomous trucks and so forth. There's also less barriers in the sense of losing jobs. Now, of course, they would take jobs away from Uber Eats or from bicycle couriers. They could threaten those, for example, but they don't take drivers' jobs away the way that people are afraid of. By the way, I don't think we're going to lose jobs because of automation, but I'm just talking about the fears that people have. That those fears are just so much less for this technology. So bottom line is, it's coming, it's here, and we're not paying enough attention to it, and there's risks. One of the risks is, the major risk that I see, is that the pedestrian has been shoved off of the road and shoved onto the sidewalk since the car. More and more the car dominates that space in between buildings. On any street, there's space from one building wall to the other, and that space is dominated by cars parking. We're creeping in a little bit with a few bicycle lanes, and we're now, if we're going to put these robots on the sidewalk, we're going to again impose on that last remaining pedestrian space. Now, I'm actually for these robots because I think they have commercial value. They I think could help BIAs recover from the COVID disaster.
What was that? What was that term you used? BIA.
Oh, I'm sorry. BIA is a business improvement area. That's
okay.
what we call it in my area. Now they're known as business improvement district and local commercial. They have many names.
And we should point that out. You are from Canada, so you do speak a different language. So
yeah. We do. I speak a different language, but I speak that language in an American accent because I'm actually from Pennsylvania. But
there you go.
But things happen. In any case, a local district, a local community district with retail in that district, like a downtown, any small town's downtown that has several blocks of retail, those have all been all of our cities and around the world. This is not an American problem. It's around the world. All of those retail districts have been harmed dramatically by COVID. They were already under pressure from e-commerce. Now COVID came in and made it worse and really helped e-commerce for good reason. And is there an opportunity, for example, for these communities to come back because of a delivery technology that's less expensive, more available, more acceptable, and so on? Can these business districts recover or somewhat from this? For example, so that's one opportunity. Another really key opportunity is that most cities have areas where the accessibility requirements from our accessibility laws have not been met. There's not full compliance everywhere because it just takes a long time for that. It takes decades for that full compliance to be put in place. These devices, if they're being used in an area, will create pressure for wider sidewalks. Pressure for wider sidewalks is good for pedestrians, it's good for accessibility, it's good for urban renewal, and so on. So there's actually a possibly golden congruence between this robotic technology, service robot technology, and business districts, and accessibility, and urban renewal. The three together. What I mean by, I should be careful about urban renewal, but what I meant by that is smart streets and smart sidewalks and walkable areas and all those kinds of things that we'd like to make the cities
improved quality of life in the urban area. Right.
Talk about urban livability. I should have used that term. So there is a win-win-win, but there's also a lose-lose-lose. There's also that we don't look after the pedestrians. We make it worse for accessibility. You come out of your home or your condo or wherever you live, and you enter a street on your way you're going to walk to the train station, and you're troubled by robots all over the place, so it makes your walk more difficult. And then another city starts to remove trees to make room for robots. There's lots of things that could be downsides as well. In fact, I can enumerate as many.
It might be good to kind of, if you wouldn't, if you're okay with it, and I can share this, but is kind of scan through your one document here that has a lot of great visuals and so forth, because I think that would bring out some of the challenges and so forth. This is kind of something, epiphany I had last night. And this gets back to probably 100 years ago or something, but when you're walking down a sidewalk, you've got a curb and you're up about 5-6 inches, and that creates all kinds of challenges.
Yep.
They developed it before wheelchairs, and so there's still curbs, or not before, just not thinking about it. There are still spots where there are curb cuts. There's people such as myself who I still have issues with walking, and I trip and stuff. And those curbs are dangerous. And I have to wonder, is this a time to kind of rethink the idea of can you create sidewalks that are level with streets but have barriers, and do you have different gradations between pedestrians versus wheeled or motorized vehicles and so forth? So once you ponder that, I'll pull up your PowerPoint.
Sure. There's projects like that already that are removing curbs. Now, of course, the curb cut itself, the curb cut at the corner, which is part of accessibility issues, and those little bumps on those curb cuts are for the white cane, the use of the
right
blind pedestrian who That's it's kind of it's a signal that you're reaching the edge of the curb. Now that's an example of these little robots, and you see the picture from the one from the company called Starship. Those small wheels can climb that curb when that curb is 4 inches and so on. And I've seen videos of it having a hard time and almost tipping over if the curb is a little bit high. But that curb cut, which is good for wheelchairs, is also good for these robots. So this is an example of a city or town or downtown that doesn't have those curb cuts in, getting those in, perhaps nudged along by their business improvement district saying, we need to get these curb cuts in for the robots. I'm saying, okay, make sure that they're all the right dimensions for accessibility while you're at it. It would be a shame to miss the accessibility requirements while you're making all these changes. Those are expensive changes. So you'd like to get, that result. So that's one example with just those curb cuts.
Do you see opportunity then, as far as funding is always a challenge, and I don't know if we talk about that now or if we talk about later, but are these the slides you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. And then where I was going to go with the question was if there's an opportunity for new revenue to help drive the changes that are going to be needed.
So the short answer is yes. Of course, it takes municipal will to do that, and it takes a method of collection. So obviously, it's easy to collect a gas tax, and it's hard to collect a toll, and it's really hard to collect, GPS-based pay-as-you-go. However, these systems, in order to make them workable and safe, and I mean safe from mischief, and also safe from their weight and speed, they're going to require V2X systems that are actually monitoring them. So imagine that these robots are going down the sidewalk, and there is detection of how many and how fast and so forth. There's also permissions, logistics permissions to use the sidewalk. So for example, I would like to deliver a sandwich to you. I have a sandwich shop, and I'm going to hire a robot. Just like I could hire Uber Eats to bring the sandwich to you, or you could hire Uber Eats to get the sandwich to you. I could hire Uber Robot. I just picked the name Uber. I should. But I could hire Billy Bob's Robot to pick up the sandwich and so on. But before I do that, I have to have permission to use that sidewalk. I have to know that I have to go through 4 blocks from the sandwich shop to your home, and I have to be able to know that I can use those 4 blocks. Can I traverse those sidewalks? Or do I have to use the bicycle lane? Or do I have to wait until the other side, the other robots are finished? In other words, there might be a municipal bylaw that says only 4 at a time, for example. So the robot service might queue up and wait its turn. And so given that's happening, and there's a system monitoring all that, then monetization now becomes trivial in terms of monetizing by time and place. So in other words, you might say during a certain time of day, your robot can deliver food for you, and that robot might have to pay 6 cents a block to deliver that sandwich to you, for example. I'm just making
sure.
Yeah. And so that's now made possible because we need to have a monitoring system. You need that for safety.
Right.
I think you could appreciate that if I had a robot that was rogue, and what I mean by that is that someone decided to use that robot for harm, and it's equipped that robot to do harm in some way. You can imagine lots of ways that could be done. You want to make sure that that robot cannot get on that sidewalk unless it's registered and known to be a permitted robot. It can't be something that. It's the same thing around an airport. When someone's flying drones around an airport, they get shot down.
And even just the commercial aspects of it, a company that is providing this robot as a service, they're going to want to know where their assets are, and they want to make sure those assets are running, and they don't want it to be stuck in the middle of the road, not delivering that sandwich, right?
For example, so the operators need to know where they are. The city needs to know that they're not speeding, they're not overweight, they're not that they have permission to be there. Again, I keep coming back. If you go down 2 more slides,
sure,
you'll see or two more PowerPoints I should.
Yeah. I'm just a little bit slow here. Sorry about that. But
okay.
But I suppose another parameter that could be in that mix would be weight as well.
Absolutely. So the standard deals with all those things, but it deals with much more than just weight and speed, and that is because and occupancy. In other words, how many vehicles. We also need a set of rules. Kind of there's a Highway Traffic Act for you and your car on the roads and streets, but there's no sidewalk traffic act.
Mm-hmm.
There's no act that says you have to walk on the right, or there's no act that says a robot has to wait for you, or the robot has to give way to humans. You just hope that happens.
Right.
And there's no act that says, for example, there's already been a case where robots have stopped at a stoplight and stood in that little curb cut that we were talking about a few minutes earlier and blocked the route of someone coming across the street in the other direction, finishing up on a stale green light, and they were about to enter the curb on the other side. And in this case, it was a student in a wheelchair in Pittsburgh who arrived at the end of her traversal of the crosswalk, and this robot was blocking her path. And she couldn't mount the curb with her wheelchair because the robot hadn't been programmed or determined to move aside. So one of the things in the standard, for example, is that a robot can't stand on a curb cut unless it's ready to proceed. So it can't wait there like you can. You can stand on the curb cut and wait for the light to change. And if you saw a wheelchair coming across the street, you would just step aside because you're aware. But robots need to be made aware of that. So there's dozens of things that a robot has to do that most people haven't thought of.
And even if they were aware, in that scenario, maybe they can't make that lateral move like a human could because they have wheels, right? So
they can't make the lateral move. It turns out, by the way, that the robot that blocked the pathway was actually a human-operated robot. Most people don't know this, but you see in that picture you're seeing, you can count 4 robots there.
So little starship robots.
Yeah, you might say, well, 4 is okay there. I mean, it's not harming anybody. What if there was 40 of them?
Yeah.
And what if they were all clustered? See, there's one, the third one in near the intersection. What if there was 12 of them at that intersection, all clustered and waiting there, and waiting for that light to turn green, for example? What happens to the pedestrians, the other 6 pedestrians that would also like to cross there, for example? So all of these things about how many and where they stand and where they gather and how many there can be, all need to be standard, all need to be regulated. And the language of that regulation, how do you tell the local V2X system with all of its IoT monitors that there's how many are permitted? And so how do you tell the logistics operators to wait until they can queue up for it and not to put them all out at once and so on? It's the language to communicate all of that. That's what the standard's about.
That makes sense. And so it does go beyond the physical, but it actually gets into the signaling system, how it overlays onto, I'm just going to throw out the 5G system, but I suppose it could be anything. It could be a DSRC traditional, or it could be V2X. But what sort of bandwidth are you looking at then? Do you think there's going to need to be full video capability or just metadata?
So your question is a complicated answer. So the answer is there's cameras going on. I mean, that's the way these devices usually have something on the order of 4 to 6 cameras. It depends how much redundancy they want. It depends on whether they want to see space or not. It depends on if the camera's mobile or not. So I want to go back to the very important point is that all 4 of these robots have a human operator sitting in some place, could be a couple miles away, but there's a human operator that can take over when needed. So the robot comes to a location where it would like the human to help it across the intersection, for example. I'm not saying it has to be, but it's equipped to do that. And so when they're in trouble, or when they need help or when they're uncertain, then the human can look out through those cameras and decide, yes, you can proceed, or it could help that robot to proceed, or could signal that robot to proceed. So they're not autonomous. They are kind of like level 3 or level 2, if you think about the SAE levels. In other words, the operator sees that the sidewalk's open and says, go. And then the machine can handle itself for the next 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 meters until it comes into some complexity of pedestrians, or maybe there's a scooter that fell down on the side, whatever. There's some reason the robot says, I'm not sure what to do. The human can take over. So you can start to imagine a system where one person's looking after all 4 of those robots, for example. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying right now the case is that one person can look after 2 or 3. The goal is for one person to look after 10 or 20. And so you can start imagining, control rooms full of people with screens watching multiple robots. You could have 10 people watching 200 robots, for example. And they switch off as needed. So when one robot's in trouble, it comes up for you to handle it. The next one comes up for me to handle it, and so forth. So that's the kind of systems that we're going toward, and that's why the barrier is lower. You see, you can't do that with robotaxis. You're not going to use a robotaxi if you think there's one person watching 10 robotaxis.
Right.
You're going to be very anxious about it.
Well, the other factor, back to the communications part of it, it seems to me that means that when everything's operating normal, it's just sending out I'm an okay signal to the back end operator. But when it gets in trouble, that's when you need the higher bandwidth video so that operator can see the situation. Yeah.
So now imagine that the robot comes to the intersections, one person watching one robot. This is what happened in the case I talked about. One person's watching one robot, and the robot arrived at the intersection. The intersection was amber, and the person said, great, this is my chance for a coffee. He parked the robot on the curb cut, turned, and it's the robot's parked on the curb cut, safe. And it's a sunny, bright day, and the intersection is clear. And across from the other side of this 4-lane highway is the student coming across on her wheelchair. Meanwhile, he's topping up his coffee and saying hello to his friend, and he comes back to sit down, and oh gosh, the light's green. And then he sees the problem, he backs it up and moves it out of the way. Meanwhile, she's very upset and called the newspaper. So this is not.
I see.
This is a case where there's no guidelines. For example, there's no guideline that says never under any circumstance is a remote operator allowed to take his eyes off. Just like we talk about this Tesla problem, you are confident enough to take your hands off the wheel, maybe take a nap or maybe watch a movie, and the fine print says no, don't do that. There's no fine print for these robots. There's nobody that said you're the remote control on this robot. Do not go away from it. If you want to get a coffee, you're gonna get somebody else to sit down and watch that robot.
And then you get into the further complication, I suppose, when you have multiple entities operating these robots, and how do they talk to each other the way humans kind of signal each other to say, okay, go ahead, cross, and so forth. That's in there. And so there's simple rules about, go to the right and so forth. There's also signaling rules. So here's a problem. You have a narrow space. There's a sidewalk. It's not in this picture, but there's some other pictures. I'll just kind of scan through them here, and you can stop me. But
actually,
we're looking for a narrow. This is a good example here.
Yeah, okay, right there, on the bottom left. Now that scooter is just abandoned there. By the way, I don't think that's a setup. I do know that this is. I do know that this.
I believe it could happen. So
well, here's what I'm saying. The top left is a marketing photograph.
Oh, okay.
So also the bottom right, because these are what Starfleet is saying is these are so inexpensive and so easy and so valuable. We can have fleets of them. In fact, they have said in one of these slides, they have said we want to see tens of thousands of these out on the street. But on the bottom left, this is from a company that used to be called Postmates. It was bought by Uber, sold back to Postmates, and this example, although it's filmed for a YouTube video, it's a very, very real instance in the sense that there's something blocking the pathway. What's not a real instance about this is there's only one pedestrian far off in the distance. So more realistically, on the upper right, there's other. That's those two women in the upper right, they're actually on the sidewalk. They're not posing.
And that's a wide sidewalk too, which isn't always the case, right?
You got it. It's not always the case. Much more of the case is the bottom left, which there's not room. Well, that's actually a pretty nice sidewalk. There's lots of sidewalks. There's not room for two robots to pass.
Right.
Because in between the tree or the telephone pole on one side and the bushes or wall on the other side, there's only room for one wheelchair. And so if you were walking along, you would have to step aside and let that wheelchair by, or in this case, the robot will pull it way aside and let you by, for example. So the robots have to know to do that. Now, if two robots are passing, they have to be able to signal to each other. There has to be rules, and there's directional rules. In other words, it comes from curb LR. There's a direction of a map. So if you're walking on the particular direction of the map, then you have the right of way.
Okay.
One of the rules, and by the way, this is for the city to decide. It doesn't have to be this way, but we have the standard includes a clockwise and counterclockwise rule. So, for example, a robot can only travel clockwise. In other words, the buildings are on the right. Why do that? Well, if you have 10 or 15 robots going in any old damn direction at all, you can have robots opposing each other, which is worse than. One thing is having 4 robots in line, like in the upper right. There's 4 or 5 robots all in line. The other is when the robots are all over the place,
right? Like
in the upper right. Well, those pedestrians, luckily the sidewalk was wide. So in the clockwise and counterclockwise, you can start to see where it gets complicated. That somebody has just made a delivery. There's a robot out to make 3 deliveries in a row. Makes delivery A and says, "Oh, I just have a new delivery. I have a new pickup that just came in." Just like in a gig operation, you've just let off one passenger, and you have to pick up another passenger, and that's 4 blocks over. So now the robot says, "I'm on a clockwise rotation around this block. I've just let off my delivery, and I just got a call to pick up sandwiches from something that is in the opposite direction, only 10 meters away. I have to go all the way around the whole block. I've got to travel like a half a mile to get back to something that's 2 yards away." So the standard has an exception. If you're in a clockwise world, can you go counterclockwise for how many meters? And the city sets that. The city says, yes, we have a clockwise rule, and yes, you can go in reverse with 6 meters.
I see.
These are all up for the city to do, because on this really wide sidewalk, the city says you can go both directions.
Okay.
But on the bottom left, you have to go counter. So the city, block by block, the city sets this up.
So have many cities, do you think they're prepared for it? Or is there an example of a city that's prepared for this?
Oh, the city preparation for sidewalk robots is exactly the same as the city preparation for Ubers in 1960.
Wait, 1960?
I meant that. So, we were not ready for Uber in 2009 when they showed up. We are not ready for sidewalk robots.
That makes sense. And, the other thing, looking at that picture in the upper right with, I don't know if those are whatever those little robots are, but looking at their height compared to the women's knees and stuff, I could see how it very easily, if you're looking at your phone, you're just looking ahead, it'd be real easy to trip on one of these little guys. And you have to wonder, can they move quick enough to get out of the way of someone who's not paying attention? So
absolutely. And so, partial solution for that is that they have those little flags. Well, that's not enough. If you were walking, in fact, there's a slide about 6 or 7 slides down with a person walking, looking at her phone.
I knew I'd seen that somewhere.
About to fall over.
There she is. No, Best Burger is.
Yeah, right there.
Yep.
Yep. Now, by the way, you'll notice it's the same Domino pizza.
Right.
Now, what they're doing, it's interesting. That's a marketing shot. It's a fake marketing shot to say to you that you're now going to have a choice between a delivery person, that woman carrying your lunch.
I see. That's what she is. Okay.
It's a marketing shot. However, I have it here because it's a pedestrian looking at her phone about ready to fall over.
Yeah, it's a great shot for that. It illustrates it. Yep.
this slide is about pedestrian safety on the right. So now we have the real problem. The person on the right, the two people on the right, you would hope that the seeing eye dog who has not been trained, the helper dogs have not been trained for these robots. Probably they're smarter than humans, so they'll figure them out because they're actually watching. The woman in orange is not watching where she's going, but but the dog in black is watching where he's going. So, but bottom line is that there's a few things in the standard. One is that these robots will be making sounds. Now we have to have a sound that says "excuse me." We have to have a sound that says "thank you." We have to have a sound that says "I apologize." In other words, it kind of got in your way. The robot detected that you had to jump aside. I'd like it to make an apology sound. The reason is I want you to accept them. You know, if I beat my horn lightly at you, you might get along with that. But if I honk my horn loudly at you in traffic, you get really upset. And so I don't want these. I don't want these machines tripping anybody or making loud sounds. I want them to make rather polite sounds when they're at first. And when if you step aside for it, I'd like it to make a thank you sound so that they're socially accepted. But now,
that makes sense.
You get too close to them because you actually intend mischief. The robot knows that people stay away from it. It's far from its destination. It still has 3 blocks to go for its destination. And you approach very closely, stand in front of it, and you are within something. There's something called a shy distance. The shy distance is how closely you walk by something. If you and I pass each other on the sidewalk, depending on how crowded the sidewalk is, we might leave a meter between us, or we might leave 6 inches between us, but we would not bump our shoulders. We would make sure we walk so as not to be so close to each other. People will avoid these robots by a couple feet, whatever number of yards or whatever. If you're within that space, you're actually coming in within very close. You're within a few inches of the robot. The robot is going to feel uncomfortable because it doesn't know what you're up to. It could be that you're up to, you would like to kick it over, or you would like to see if you can open the lid.
Right.
But it's not
steal it. Right.
Well,
yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, this stuff goes on. People do things to them. And so if the robot feels threatened, I would like the robot to make a kind of whining sound or a kind of fearful sound, afraid sound. Just like a dog would whimper. Like if you approached the dog and it was afraid of you, it might whimper. But if you actually went out to grab the dog, it would bark. So in other words, there's a range of sounds that are kind of low key and they kind of grow in size. So the afraid sound grows into alarm. It's telling you, if you get any closer, I'm going to sound an alarm. So you back off. Or if it has an excuse me sound because of whatever reason, because you're standing and not doing anything and it wants to get around. At what point should the robot turn around and go back in the other direction, or give up, or just shut down and wait? Or at what point can the robot make a sound that says, excuse me? I don't know what those rules are, but the standard says that the robot should be equipped with those sounds so that the city can say when and if those sounds should be used.
So in the standard itself, do you believe, or do you think you'll, prescribe specific, these are the things that have to be said, or is it going to be more general?
The standard is going to, the intention is, the standard is going to create a language. Right now, the language has 4 sounds and 2 or 3 levels of each sound. That's the intention. The sounds have not been devised. I'm working with a sound engineer who usually works with animation to make those sounds. Like Roadrunner sounds and whatever the sounds are. I mean, I'm not going to say what the sound. I'm not an audio engineer, and I don't know how to do that. The standard will describe those sounds, but what the standard doesn't say is that you have to use them. The city says, okay, if you want to operate your robots in our city, then you have to use these sounds.
That makes sense.
It's up to the city. So everything about the regulation is a municipal or state or government regulation. It's the operators that says, oh, we'd like to operate in Minneapolis, or we'd like to operate in Las Vegas, and Las Vegas says, here are the rules. Here are the standards that we have to comply with in order to operate in that city. So that's, again, the standard sets up the language for that, and it sets up how that's described. In other words, the standard allows the city to express what the rules are, and the standard allows the maker and operator to understand that expression and comply.
Do you see those standards going beyond the pedestrian machine interface, but also the machine to machine interface? Back to that communications thing, this, to me, it seems like could be the local interaction between those two robots. So even if they have no connection back to their homes, they would still be able to interact.
Yeah, that was a tough one. I took that one out. So I took part of that. So one of them was, and it's still, I don't know how to deal with this because I have help from my working group to do this. But one of them is robots have to be able to communicate to at least the local infrastructure. So if the robot is somehow disconnected with its keeper, in other words, there's somehow the operator is monitoring these robots, and if that's disrupted because there's a crash, and the ability for that robot to communicate has been harmed by the crash. Other robots, if they see them, standards thought that's not, it's uncertain if this is going to work. The other robots would be obligated to report them. What that means is that robots, part of the standard is that they all have a QR code on at least two faces in case it tips over on its side and that QR code is hidden, the other QR code is visible. And that's because a police person might come up with a handheld device and read the QR code to find out who owns that device. So they find that device belongs to so-and-so company because it doesn't all belong to, they're not all going to be from one company. They might be from 30 or 40 different companies. So where is this vehicle registered? And it's now disabled. It can't even communicate with its home base. There has to be ways to deal with that. So that's part of it, is that another robot, because it has cameras, is on the street, sees that robot, can read the QR code and report the QR code. That is very complicated. I'm not saying it's technically complicated, but it's governance complicated. That's the problem here, because the standard is actually about regulation and governance, or enabling regulation and governance, and that's why. So it gets into some pretty obscure areas like that.
Well, and I would imagine too, it also has to give some sort of signal that it's in distress, because how do you know it's not just sitting there waiting for something or whatever, right?
Well, those distress I talked earlier about the sounds it would make. The I'm afraid sound accelerates into, you know what, I'm really upset and I'm gonna cause an alarm, right up to an alarm. Now that alarm goes out sound-wise, so it chases people away, but it also it would cause somebody in nearby maybe to use 911, but it also is digital, goes out to the operator.
I would imagine too, it could be a visual too, like a red light flashing or something, or
right. Well, for every one of those set of 4, I use 4 because I'm trying to keep that number small. Whatever those 4 sounds are, or if there's 5, but in the multiple levels, there's a matching light sequence. But lights are constrained to red, amber, and green because those are the colors used in traffic. You don't have purple and blue lights in traffic. I know you have blue for certain kinds of emergency vehicles, but traffic signals are use that set of colors, and there's good reason. It's just how the human eye works and how fast we respond to them and so on. So the lights that go with those sounds would be comprised of those. They could blink, they could flash, they could, I don't know what, but it has to be simple. It can't be something that costs the operator, it costs every machine $1,000 to install. It has to be something that can be done for 30 or 40 bucks and be reliable. Right. Because they have to run on at least two faces of the device.
So back to the communications thing, and I want to get to kind of the video itself and the potential for things like surveillance. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about the network. Have you looked into that as far as what you think the bandwidth demands are going to be, or is that something that's still? I guess it really would be outside the standard, probably.
Yeah, the standard. There's a communications section of the standard. 3 of this. There's 11 parts of the standard. So part 3 is about communication and cybersecurity. And it mentions multiple ISO standards that are already in existence for automated vehicles and other vehicles. And it uses all those same standards. But the standard I'm talking about is agnostic to whichever one we use.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, so we don't need to dwell on that. But I do wonder, I've often thought that these would be great devices for recording crimes and so forth.
Yep.
And then, of course, that gets into the whole surveillance state and the concern about privacy and that sort of stuff. So
one of the elements, again, remember this is all a draft there. One of the elements is that the robots are I don't want to use forbidden, but I use the language shall not. The robots shall not take away any additional privacy. So for example, the implication is that the robot needs cameras to move down the street, but it can't keep that data because that camera might, for example, that camera as it's going down the street, it sees how busy your store is. You have a restaurant on the street, and that camera can see how busy you are, and I use that information to compete with you because I own another store somewhere else, and so on. The standard says it can't keep any of that information. It can only keep the data that it needs to, so it needs to navigate the street, but it can't keep and store and use that data for something else. Now, the standard can't prevent that from happening. The standard can say how that can be checked and that the city require that these vehicles be able to prove that they're not doing that, but that's outside the scope. In the scope says not only the privacy, but I can't make you any less secure. In other words, you have a certain ability to use the side. So for example, you're older and you are on a walker and it's icy and you are using that pavement, and now the robot comes up and behaves in such a way that you have to scurry out of the way and you fall. And your fall has been precipitated by the presence and behavior of this device. That's a security, it's a personal physical security issue. And these machines cannot make you less secure, both cyber secure and malware secure, and also physically secure in your use of that sidewalk.
That's an interesting example because it does kind of counter that point of not keeping the data, because in that case, they would actually have data that showed, well, the way our robot was behaving, it caused this accident. So it's, there is a lot of value in having data like that, but
it's a good point. So, but the main point is there is a lot of contradictions. If you read the standard, you say, well, I love your clause 7. I love your clause 19. They don't work together.
Yeah. Well, and then the other factor too is that some of it will probably be beyond the city's control because it might end up being state or federal jurisdiction. I would guess. I'm not a lawyer, so I have no idea. But
guess who's taking considerable interest in this standard? It's called the insurance industry.
I would imagine.
I guess so. Yeah. Do you know who's taking no interest at all? Zero interest.
Who's that?
FedEx, Starship, Uber, called them all. They will not answer.
And they are the most important people to be involved in this, it seems. The
reason is, I understand. I think if I was them, I wouldn't call me either. The reason is they're busy innovating. They're busy growing business. Standards take a long time. They want to do what Apple did. They want to set the standards themselves.
Sure.
And they're going to set, but the problem is, and you already underscored it, how do you get multiple fleets to operate together? Not only that, I'm not talking about that they can talk to each other, that the robot from company A and a robot from company B says, hey, I'm going to the right. Can you let me through? That's easy. Those guys can work that out themselves. The problem is that the city says only 4 can be on the sidewalk at once. Well, who's going to manage that? That is a queuing. That's a municipal queuing system. And then each one of those has to get on that queue. And so how do you work that? So we say, well, let's let Amazon do that. Well, wait a minute, that's not going to work because they're just going to buy us the numbers and they'll always let their own machines on. So you have to have an independent. You have to have a company that has no business and no robots on that sidewalk to actually manage the queuing system on that sidewalk.
And I would assume, is that kind of where you guys are going with Harmonize Mobility these days?
That's why we're called Harmonize Mobility. We're going to harmonize all these fleets of robots.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because there's definitely a niche in this. It's an interesting thing because, in a sense, you're taking that retail store, it seems to me, and you're extending its presence into the home with these retail vehicles. So just like they have to pay property taxes for having that retail space and local business taxes, it seems like there should be some sort of payment to use the public right of way to do commerce, and whether that extension is from 2,000 miles away from a warehouse or a local retailer. So the trick is getting that right, I guess.
Yeah. So the good news is there's two standards. There's a standard called 5206, which is a parking standard, and it has all the data needed to monetize. And this standard you and I are talking about, this 4448 for the robotaxi and the sidewalk robot, that has the remaining data that's needed to monetize the sidewalk. So the two together, the two standards together. But again, I have to underscore, it's up to the municipality. If the municipality says we're not monetizing, then the operators say, great, but we're not paying.
Right, and then you don't necessarily get the revenue you need to fix the roads and to repair the sidewalks and make them usable for.
Well, you think about it. Just because Donald Shoup said you should charge a certain amount for parking on the curb, that doesn't mean that every city in North America charges what would be the optimal Shoup amount for using the curb. Some charge more, some charge less, and some give it away for free. Same thing will happen. There will be cities that say no sidewalk robots ever, no matter what. And there will be rogue operations. And then some cities will say, yes, they can be here and they'll pay nothing. Or some say, yes, they can be here and they'll pay this amount. City by city. We're just giving you the language.
Yeah. And that makes sense. And for viewers who are unaware of Donald Shoup, he was the UCLA professor who wrote The High Cost of Free Parking, right? Talking about the fact that there's a huge public asset that is given away for free often, or underpriced, I guess.
So the high cost of free robots is coming up. I can see it.
Hey, you can write that book. I guess you already have.
That's a great bill. I just realized that's the title of the book.
Well, and I never thought that this could be a possibility until this conversation. But what about the possibility of private ownership of these little bots, of someone who doesn't want to walk to the grocery store, having their bot go back and forth? I mean, we've talked about it in the autonomous vehicle space where you have, your own vehicle that drives you around and then looks for free parking and stuff. Yeah. Could this be a possibility with robots?
Absolutely. The standard is agnostic to that. The standard recommends, actually says, there shall be a registered entity. In other words, so the answer is yes. It's
a registered entity could be a private individual then, I suppose, huh?
Yeah, so a municipality says, in order to register these robots, you have to be a corporation, and you have to have this amount of insurance, and you have to do this amount of things, and you have to be trained in this way, and your operators have to be facilitated. They could say, if a private person, let's say an older person would like to have their own robot to do all their errands for, then the city says you can purchase your own robot, but you have to register with an operator. So you own your own private robot. You own your own private robot. It's yours. You keep it in your garage. It's got your name on it, and it's yours. And no one uses it except you. But when you send it out for something, it has to connect to someone's robot management system. In other words, you say, go get my pizza, and it leaves your garage under the operation of your selected operator. It's the same thing. You have a cell phone, it's your cell phone, except that you use Verizon. Well, that robot's your robot, but you're going to use, whoever's robot management system. And when you tell it what to do, it has to go out and get the tokens to permit you onto those sidewalks. It has to know that in this place you cannot use the bicycle lane. In this other place you can use the bicycle lane. And it knows all those things because it's an operator, but you own the box. The actual machine is yours.
That makes sense. I mean, I was thinking of just robot as a service, but it does lead to the other thing. I think that is what is attractive about this. You touched upon it, is that you're not replacing jobs. What you're replacing is, Dr. Kornhauser always likes to talk about, you're replacing the person's time that they would normally spend in the vehicle going to these shops. So that's kind of what you're replacing.
So this is a very interesting point. So there's a city, Milton Keynes in.
Oh yeah, in London or UK, right?
And that is the city that has the most of these robots. Now, a city person, a person there who's kind of a city employee. I don't know what his job title is, but he's a senior city employee, and he's responsible for this huge pilot of many of these Starship devices. And he's made the point, I have no way to confirm this, that a majority of these trips have replaced short car trips, because people will get in their car just to go like 8 or 10 blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people will get on their bicycle to go pick up something. People will walk to pick up something. And he says, again, I am not able to confirm this, majority of those trips have replaced, robot trips have replaced short car trips as opposed to replacing bike and walk trips.
Oh, interesting.
If he's telling the truth, that is the best news you've ever heard about automation.
Yeah, because I was concerned about the Wall-E effect, right? The fact that you just stay home and have the world delivered to you.
Yeah.
And
the picture you have up here is interesting. This is a very, very interesting environment. On the left picture on the left, by the way, that's the same picture, just in reverse.
Yeah.
I just took the picture from both sides. This is a candid picture. These are people that don't even know I'm photographing. This is a place where the sidewalk has bicycle locks partially into the sidewalk. And it has some constructions on the sidewalk. And you can see very clearly there's room for one wheelchair to pass there. A sidewalk robot could not pass at the same time. So the question is, it's all this fine print underneath. The robot comes up and it knows that there's a narrow passage in front of it, and it knows that this passage is like 30 yards long. It's a really long passage, and it sees that the passage is cluttered with pedestrians and things. It has to wait. It has to keep it. Now, finally, a passage opens up, and it proceeds down, and halfway down, another wheelchair comes in at the end. So it goes, oh my God, what am I going to do? I have to reverse out of this.
Right.
As it reverses, there's a wheelchair behind me. So, so these spaces, these long throats create traps. So one of the parts of the standard is you can't operate robots with these long, narrow passageways because of robot traps. You can't trap a robot in between.
You have a mini Suez Canal situation.
Oh yes, that's it. Thank you. No, that's what was that ship called? That's
I forgot the name right now, but
whatever that ship is called, that's what this is called.
Yeah, you've just got just so many great images here of real streets and the challenges of living in the real world with these things.
This is the beginning of a book. I'm writing a book. These are some of the pages from the book.
Nice.
That this is maybe this. You're looking at probably that document is maybe about 15% of the book, and it's going to be a biggie.
Yeah, this unmapped feature here is the type of thing I would easily trip on. So, but it's impossible probably for a robot, right?
Yeah. These are all so that's near where I live, and that other one on the right is from Lisbon or Paris.
Oh yeah, the classic scooter thrown on the ground.
It's from Lisbon. These are all casual. In fact, the woman's kind of picking her pants there. These are all casual photographs that are. This is a city on the right. That car is the City of Toronto car. Look how they're parked.
That's hilarious. This is actually that's actually a City of Toronto government car.
That's a City of Toronto government car. It's a municipal government car, and that the municipal person was given to run whatever errand they were running.
Yeah, and then the situation here with the gate that's open, the sidewalk.
That's a construction zone, and that person has a construction fence, and they just leave it like that. That was like that for several months.
Yeah, well, and then the sidewalk, just in terrible. And unfortunately, there's a lot of that. Garbage collection days.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Oh, this is beautiful. I was on that streetcar on the left, That FedEx truck blocked my. It didn't prevent me from getting off the streetcar, but it was like smack in front of me. I had to walk around the streetcar, which I did, around the FedEx, which I did. The middle picture, I came on the other side of that FedEx truck, and I took a picture of the sign. The FedEx truck was parking in a no standing. And I thought, this is where these robots should be useful. Then I took the picture on the right. This is all one long picture.
Mm-hmm.
And the picture on the right, the sidewalk is so busy with transit people that there's no room for the sidewalks anyway. So when people say, "Oh, this is going to be so great, we're just going to replace these big step vans with these little," no, you're not. You're going to move the problem from the street to the sidewalk.
Well, I guess that's part of. Here you go. Right sizing will remain a challenge. I was just going to talk about right sizing.
There you go. So that would. You ever see those pictures that they'll show you a bus? And then they'll show you beside the bus there's a picture of 40 cars.
Right.
This is the same picture. This is a picture with a bus and 40 packages. Now, I'd like you to replace that with 40 robots.
Right.
Absolutely absurd. So I'm telling you, there's places for these robots and there's places that these robots should not be. That's to be decided by city operators, and that's to be encoded into the management system for each city, and that's what the standard is for. Yeah,
just more great examples of how the sidewalk can be blocked with things that are useful, but probably.
Well, you want the planters. You want the planters. But one of the things, should you design, instead of being a big square planter, should it be a long rectangular planter to hold the same amount of plants and roots? But then if you do that, then you become a problem for jaywalkers, because if you have a long planter that's, let's say, instead of a planter that's like 48 inches by 48, or it's not 48.
Yeah, if you elongate that or something.
Yeah, if you elongated that, then you become a block to jaywalkers. They can't get up. They can't mount this up. Now you might say, well, it shouldn't be jaywalkers, but you know what? We've stolen enough pedestrian space. We've made jaywalking illegal, which it wasn't before cars. Cars made that illegal. So now robots are going to make it even harder.
Yeah, in California, actually, there's a bill, I believe, that would make jaywalking, it would delegalize. Wait, it would make it legal again, I guess.
Decriminalize.
Thank you. That's the word.
I'm all for decriminalizing jaywalking. I jaywalk all the time, and come and arrest me. But I have been. Well, I was once. But
I can't say that I'm not guilty.
Well, I've actually trained my daughters to jaywalk, because I said most pedestrians die at intersections because they are looking down at their phone, and everybody thinks the intersection is safe, and crosswalks are safe. But the rule is, don't walk in front of a car.
Yeah.
That's the rule. Anyway.
Yeah, some of these special case environments we don't have here in sunny California, but I guess we do occasionally have leaves. So we have cracked sidewalks and so forth, but theirs is and I love this one too, the whole foraging ants.
This is from Milton Keynes. That is a picture. That's a picture taken by someone who wasn't involved, who just came upon it and posted it. I got his permission to use it. You can see his link down below.
Oh, yeah.
And what that is, what I found out later, is that was a test. Do you see how evenly they're all spaced?
Right.
That was a test to run lots and lots of them back. I don't know what the test was testing, but it was a form of traffic test for these. And I don't know what that test was, because they're all very evenly spaced. I didn't understand why they were so evenly spaced. But,
that makes sense. And then, of course, you have the whole thing too of that. That's an interesting thing, because they can kind of keep pace and keep their distance. But then if you get a person in the mix, someone who's maybe a slow walker, suddenly you've got that challenge in passing them. And I think we need to bring this up before we depart the topic, but Pennsylvania just passed this law, the 12 miles an hour, 650-pound robot law, I think is what it is. Well, why don't you talk to that when you get these?
So while you're talking to it, go down to the second last slide, go all the way down to number 47. And I wrote there, it's very, very fine print. You won't be able to read it on screen, but there I wrote a critique of 11 states. Pennsylvania's one of them. I don't think I picked it out by name, because it's not really by business to pick it out by name. But there is multiple areas. So one problem is, and it's on the third column. Is it a pedestrian or a vehicle? So Pennsylvania said they're a pedestrian. 3 or 4 states says they're pedestrians. Other states say they're bicycle. All of them have a speed and weight. The problem with speed and weight is momentum. So you can have a very lightweight, like I can have a balloon hit you at 100 miles an hour. It would sting. Or I could have a bullet, which is much smaller, hit you at whatever speed the bullet goes, and it's fatal. So speed and weight have to do with momentum, but not a single state, because the word momentum isn't, legislators can't spell momentum.
Right. Good point.
And that's what the issue is. So the standard, we standardize momentum. So you can have, you can set the speeds you want, but you need to understand, Virginia was the first state, and they said, and it was lobbied by the one with the Starship lobbied to put it in. It had to be under 50 kilograms, whatever it is. In other words, when that Starship was full of cargo, the weight that Virginia said cannot be heavier than that. A little bit later, FedEx comes along and says, whoa, wait a minute. Our vehicle's bigger, and we're carrying bigger things, and we're carrying big things for people. And so that's where the state came up to 20 miles per hour, but it's really meant for bicycle lane, but they didn't say that. It's still called sidewalk. It was something like 20 miles per hour, and something like 800 pounds or 500 pounds or 500 kilograms. I forget the numbers, but anyway, it was effectively a small vehicle. It would be effectively like a Mini Cooper riding on the sidewalk at maybe 20 miles an hour. Not something you want to get hit by. Now, that's not what the intention was. The legislator did not intend that. The legislators intended to allow Neuros, which are those larger vehicles, to go on a roadway, and allow Starships, the smaller ones, to go on a sidewalk, but they didn't make any sufficient distinctions.
Just and looking for a Neuro here. Do you have a Neuro in your presentation?
I don't.
I'm not seeing one. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but the Neuros are the vehicles intended for the road.
Those are intended at the worst for a bicycle lane, but really for small streets. That they would come out of the grocery store, go down your small street, stop at the edge of your curb, and you go out and pick up your groceries from that.
And then they'd go on to the next house, or
it might leave the grocery store with for example, 4 different orders, and 2 or 4 orders in it, and you would take it out.
Yeah, it'd be going like maybe 25 miles an hour down the street, stop, and
for example.
Yeah.
So again, the standard's not saying the standard's agnostic. If the city says we would like cars to go on the sidewalk at 100 miles an hour, I said, well, that's kind of your business. But here's how to express that. So there's multiple ways to govern these things, and the standard is designed so that you can be pedestrian first, you can be commerce first. I leave that's all left up to the city fathers. It's not our business to tell you how to run your city, but if you want to have these robots, and regulate them, here's the language to use.
And this is an example here of one of the telemonitoring that you talked about earlier. From a harmonized mobility standpoint, I imagine, though, that is probably one of the things you will do is help cities kind of figure out how to do this, or is that outside what you guys are doing?
That's well, it's not helping out a city is.
I mean, as on a consulting basis or whatever.
Yeah, no, we do that on a consulting basis, but we say, for example, we let the city know that these are teleoperated. They would say, okay, we know that. How do we know how many teleoperators there should be? And I say, well, on that street they are. See that street on your left. Starships could probably have. I'm just saying, I'd have to confirm with Starship. They could have one person operate maybe 2 or 3. You show me another sidewalk that's so wide, one person could operate 5. You show me another sidewalk that's such a mess, I would say one person's going to be 100% operating 1. So I would be able to make those estimates for a city, but only after I look at the sidewalk.
Yeah, and you know, I'm sorry, Bern. I had this image up, but I didn't necessarily mean specifically consulting on that particular question. It was just the more general question of helping them manage this curb sidewalk. It seems like there's 2 parts. First is understanding what the needs and what they want, and helping them define that. And then there's the other aspect of actually managing it.
Well,
I imagine you're doing both.
Yeah, one of our services is to rate. So they come in and say, I would like you to look at all these sidewalks downtown. And there's like 6 blocks by 8 blocks. And I want you to map out how many robots can safely operate on these sidewalks. So what we would do in that case is the sidewalks as they are, don't touch anything. We'll tell you block face by block face how safe and how many are sensible given what you told me you want to do. The same question in reverse, they say, oh, we want to have these, we want to be the world leader in sidewalk, but we want to have sidewalk robots everywhere. Just like Milton Keynes. Say, okay, in order to do that, here's what you need to do. You need to move those telephone poles, you need to trim back those bushes. So we tell you what you can do with what you have, or what you have to change to do what you want to do.
So again, go ahead.
Again, we're agnostic to what you want to do.
Right. It leads to an interesting opportunity for the cities, it seems to me, of being able to offer franchises just like they do for telecommunications companies, or used to do anyhow. Now a lot of state laws preempt kind of some of the local, but they still have franchise rules. It seems like they could, and it seems like there might even be a limited number of franchises, or, because of the mix of operators. Do you see that being part of the mix as far as, you're going to need this franchise to operate in our city, and, this is kind of the bare minimum, and it becomes a franchise type opportunity?
There's 2 franchises there. A city might say, you know what, we're going to allow no more than 6 companies to operate these vehicles. That's one form of franchise. So we say, we're going to let in Star this, and we're going to let in FedEx that. We know we have to let in FedEx and UPS. I mean, you can't, those companies are so dominant, and they do so much for so many people that you can't say, well, we're going to let in FedEx but not UPS. That's not going to work. They have to let them in. Anyway, that's one element of franchise. That doesn't need to be limited. The standard would allow that to be managed in an unlimited fashion. Here's the franchise you really need. We need to have somebody as the global operator. So you need to hire an IBM or a Siemens or you need to hire a major operator to operate the V2X system that manages the queuing for all of these. That's the franchise. And I think when this, as people understand what's going on here, companies like the big telcos would say, oh, hey, we want that franchise.
Yeah, Verizon has a subsidiary that is doing something similar in the drone industry, flying drones.
Well, send this to Verizon.
Yeah, Skyward, I think, is the name of it. I think that's similar to what you're describing.
You can't have more than one operator. The reason is you can't have FedEx using you can't have FedEx using Verizon's and UPS doing the other ones unless they collaborated. So then you'd have this extra layer where that would be just a mess.
Yeah, there needs to be some common middleware or common language it all comes to, I guess, right?
Well, we create the language, but there's queues. So so that street that you're looking at on the left right there, there's a queue of 13 robots waiting for their turn to get on there. And all of those 13 robots are from 4 different companies, but they're all in the same queue. They're all in the Verizon queue.
So it becomes a traffic, but you need a traffic management system, if you will, or air traffic control, if you will.
It's ground traffic control. Imagine that you have a city and all the northwest, all the east-west lights are run by Verizon, and all the north-south lights are run by another. That's what you're going to get here.
Yeah.
So you have to have all the queues for all the robots being operated by the same company. Now it gets worse because we also queue robotaxis. Say, well, the robotaxis got nothing to do with the sidewalk robots, except when we have goods delivery vehicles that pull up to the road, like a robo truck pulls up and releases multiple. Yeah, it was back there on number 10 or 11.
Okay.
And releases multiple sidewalk robots. It's the ones with the ambulatory robots, the dog robots we're showing.
Yeah, I was thinking. Oh, anyway, I was looking for a delivery van, but
yeah. So if a delivery
like this one here potentially.
See that truck. It's a robo truck. This is a fake picture, of course. Sure. It's just a marketing picture. But that truck needed to schedule its place to use that curb. It had to be in the queue. So yes, you can use that curb at 11:15. And when you get there, yes, you can let off 4 robots or 5 robots. It let off 5 robots. So it arrives there and it says, oh, that sidewalk only allows 3 robots. So that would be out of spec.
Whoops. I'm trying to zoom in on this just because what's very interesting about this in particular is these look like, and I'm glad that we found this picture, these look like little dynamic Boston Dynamic type robots with little legs.
They're little dogs.
So that changes a lot of things, I would imagine. But for one thing, it could lead to the idea of now you don't necessarily have to be there to pick up the delivery. It could, drop it. Eventually.
So I'm not saying these guys are good. So these guys can walk up steps, but these are just experimental vehicles.
Right. But I mean, this is the future where people probably aspire to be.
But do you want this robot to open the front door, to buzz your buzzer in your condo? You live on the 18th floor, buzzes your condo and speaks to you in a computer voice to let you in the door, goes in the door, comes up your elevator, and opens the door of your apartment to give you Meals on Wheels because you're on a wheelchair. So this is science fiction, and I just really think it has a lot of problems. However, what it does, when you get an ambulatory robot, the whole issue of potholes and stepping aside and curbs and I can step over a problem, I can step around construction. The world's going to go toward ambulatory robots.
It takes care of a lot of the issues that you have with wheels, right?
It takes care of a lot of them. So I think the thing you see on the left, I think in 20 years that will be a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing you see on the right will be more likely.
But regardless of where, when that happens, for cities to start the preparation today and get that mindset going, it seems to me this is something that should have happened yesterday, probably, right?
Well, it started 1.5 years ago.
Okay, well, it should have started 5 years ago. Anyway, no, but it's great that it started because this is something that it needs.
Well,
I have
several cities that are advising me. I meet with them 3 times a year. Cities like Orlando, Boston, Washington, D.C., London, England, Budapest in Hungary, and I wish I could remember the others offhand, are all reading drafts of this standard and advising me what's. Now, I also have the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. It's looking at this, making sure that we have accessibility issues for the blind and for the deaf. And there's already 2 people that are involved advising about wheelchairs and making sure that all those standards get incorporated, all the accessibility standards get incorporated. So I put out quite a wide net, and I also have a 6 urban planners that are sponsoring this. I need to have all the names before I name them because I don't want to name some and not others.
Yeah, sure. We can always add that in the description if you want.
They're actually, well, I need to get their permission.
Okay.
But so it's being financed by because of the cost of developing this. So it's being sponsored by a total of a dozen companies. 2 of them make robots, and 10 of them are planners. And the cities are not sponsoring, but they are advising. Because this really, and I hope I've underscored it, this is for cities to decide, and it is for manufacturers to comply and operators to comply.
Well, it's something that's clearly needed. It's you've certainly shed a lot of light on a topic that I've only given, kind of very little thought to.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's still a lot of opportunity for thinking on this, and you're doing that. So, Bern, it's been great catching up with you.
Well, thanks for listening to all this. It's a lot of stuff. It's quite fun. I'm very excited about it.